All right, y'all, welcome to the next episode of Bates Nursery Botanical Boot Camp. I'm Ben Tress with Bates Nursery, and we're kind of doing a follow-up on the talk that Joy did on Tuesday. She did a talk on planting for wildlife, and we're definitely going to see some overlap today, probably some of the exact same plants that Joy pulled. We're going to kind of refresh, and then we're also just going to talk about winter interest in general and what your options are to turn a time of the year that's usually forgotten about into something that you can really go out and enjoy. Our weather has been great so far this season, so there's lots of reasons to get out, enjoy the landscape, and if we can provide some ideas for what is going to look good in the winter and you can plant those, it should help you just get a lot of extra life out of your garden. I do want to start first with foliage specifically on plants. This is the big thing right now. This is probably the best year I can remember, and the consensus seems to be the same, the best year for fall color most of us can remember in a while. So our maples, our dogwoods, black gums, all these trees are really going through full show right now. If you're driving around looking at the hills, you're going to notice all this. So we're going to talk about foliage first, and then we'll move on to blooms in the winter, berries, a lot of stuff that Joy talked about, and then bark. Kind of one of my favorite things to talk about is what is this plant going to look like without leaves? All right, so foliage, deciduous trees and shrubs, meaning they're going to lose their leaves, is what we're going to talk about first. And I've got a cornucopia of plants behind me, so we'll just kind of go through them. I'll pick them up, show them to you. We'll talk about them a little bit. The trees I'm not going to have in here for you are the maples and the oaks. Those are two really good trees for fall color. Autumn blaze maple is by far our most popular. They'll grow 40 to 60 feet. They'll be bright red in the fall. Those are kind of halfway through their fall color, still looking good. Oak trees tend to have a yellow to a red fall color. Of course, these are going to be some of the biggest trees in our landscape with fall colors. So red maples, amur maples, and oak trees. Dogwood is also something that's really been beautiful this year. Most dogwoods are going to turn red. In fact, I have one behind me here, and let me get a hold of that. Okay, so dogwood, and you can probably see this. The dogwoods this year have tended to be more red, but as you can see here, depending on the light exposure, how quickly our winter turns cold, you can get a whole array of color on dogwoods. This dogwood right here, this is a Cherokee Princess, which is an improved native dogwood variety. Typically they're going to go red, but you can see this one has yellows, greens, reds, really just a plethora of color. The more shade you give this, the more color you're probably going to see in a slower fade. So dogwood, Cornets, Florida, really a great show this year. Great choice for understory tree or on the edge of the wood lines. So after dogwood, black gum, that's probably one of my favorite trees in general and for fall color. I've got a black gum kind of tucked in the corner here. So real similar to our dogwood. Here's our black gum. They tend to have every color you can imagine on our trees. You're going to have greens, yellows, oranges, and typically they're going to fade to a bright red. Black gums are very, very tough in our area. They can take wet spaces. They can take dry spaces. Typically a 40 to 50 foot pyramid. Really great choice for fall color. Definitely in my top three. Okay, Father Gila. That's another one of my favorites, and this is more of a shrub. But here's a Father Gila. As you can see, it's going to be a similar color to the black gum. Father Gila tends to go from the bottom up, but you can get all sorts of different color changes. But they're going to be green, red, orange, a lot of very hot colors all at the same time on this plant. This is Mount Airy Father Gila. They can get a little bigger, like 6 to 10 feet tall and wide. We have a new variety called Redneck Nation that stays small. It'll still have the same color change. Wonderful plant, or shrub rather, for your fall landscape. Okay, Viburnum is another deciduous foliage fall plant. Let me see if I can find my Viburnum. And I believe this is one Joy talked about on Tuesday, but this is Brandywine. Kind of get close there. This is really going to be a true deep red shrub. These tend to go 6 to 8 feet tall, a little less on width. But Viburnum is a native species of plant. Some Viburnum, especially this one, the smooth Viburnum, really brilliant red fall color. They do bloom in the spring, so a multifunction plant, great one this time of year. Viburnum blueberry. So I did want to talk about blueberry. I think it's definitely underused for fall color. Most blueberries tend to go a very, very deep red, typically one of the earliest to turn in the fall. So blueberry, we can get food out of this. We can also get an enjoyable fall color. So I think this is definitely a plant that can be used more in the landscape for fall color. Also, probably one of the favorites around here is Japanese maples. I can't not mention that for fall color. I do have a coral bark Japanese maple behind me. These will tend to go from green summer color to a yellow to a brilliant orange. This is probably really up there for fall color, but there's a lot of other ones like Legima Sinago, various other ones. Typically the green leaf varieties tend to have more brilliant fall color. We'll talk about this tree a little bit later. It's also got this red branching, which gives you another layer of color in the winter. I do also want to mention, while we're talking about trees that lose their leaves, there's a few perennials that'll give you fall color. This one is Amsonia, Amsonia hubrichtii. These are going to have really brilliant yellow to orange fall color. Typically, people plant them in massing. Green through the rest of the year, but right about now, I mean, these are about as golden yellow as you can get in your perennial beds. Once it's done doing its thing, cut it back, do it again next year. Okay. I think we've kind of done all of the deciduous plants that I was kind of wanting to talk over. Of course, there's probably many others. We'd be more than happy to kind of peruse that if you want to come in and look at plants. I do also want to talk about evergreens changing color in the fall, specifically something that we call bronzing. So bronzing is when an evergreen changes color into the winter. Sometimes with different light exposures, we'll get a different coloring, and this is classically seen in boxwood. And I do have a couple here in the corner. Winter gem boxwood is a really common one to get bronzing on, and this will depend on sun exposure. The more sun that this is exposed to, the more bronzing we're going to get through the winter. If this is in a shady, protected courtyard, it may stay green through the winter. But you can use bronzing as an effect. It's not necessarily a negative. But you can see we're getting kind of an orangey, yellowy tip to this boxwood. They will turn green again in the spring. But just something to notice on boxwood, certain varieties like winter gem and winter green will have a really good bronze change in the winter. As well as a newer one that we've gotten this year. So this is Unraveled. This is actually a weeping boxwood, but as you can see, other than the peculiar weeping habit, this will bronze too, so you do get this kind of neat color change in the fall. Boxwoods are not just boring green all year. Another plant that tends to go through a bronzing is Cryptomeria. I kind of have more of a unique one here. So this Cryptomeria, it's one of my kind of favorites for being unique. This is called Mushroom. And though this is green during the year, it will turn yellow, shades of purple, which is kind of typical of Cryptomeria. Usually they'll be kind of on the bluish purple spectrum as it gets really cold in the winter, and they'll turn green again in the spring. So One of those evergreens, even though you'll get year-round interest, you'll also get an extra layer of color in the winter. There's a few others that I didn't really bring in here. So Osmanthus can go through bronzing. Leucothwaite, I do have one of those. So Leucothwaite, this is an evergreen, low mounding shrub. Typically through the year, we're going to have a green foliage, but as it gets colder, we do get these kind of purple, reddish tones coming into the plant. Again, this will right itself in the spring. These will turn green, gives you an extra layer of color for the winter. Did actually bring a Goshiki. So this is a type of Osmanthus. They don't tend to bronze quite as much, but you do get more color change in these leaf tips as it gets cold in the winter. So I'll mention Goshiki. This is also another one that's just great for winter color, really good for a shade garden. There's a vine. The one vine I wanted to mention is crossvine. Sorry, I'm moving around all today, guys. This is crossvine. So one of my favorite native plants, this is Bignonia capreolata, an evergreen vine. Although it's evergreen, it does tend to turn a really nice purple or red in the winter. They'll lose some leaves, but at my house, they really will be truly evergreen. In the spring, these purple leaves will turn bright green very quickly. So really neat if you need to create a screen or cover a wall. Great native vine that's going to give you some winter color. So let's see, and the last thing I wanted to mention for evergreens for fall color was Nandina. Sometimes this plant gets overlooked. Nandina, now this is one called Lemon Lime. Most Nandinas are going to be on the hot color spectrum, reds, yellows, oranges. I kind of like this one because it gives you this kind of vibrant green color. These don't really change color in the winter, but they're going to continue growing, and you will get this really nice color splash when a lot of other things are dormant in the winter. So Nandina, especially for a full sun location, really tough, and it really will add a lot to your winter garden. And a few perennials I do want to talk about, evergreen perennials specifically that you can use to add interest to the winter. One is Dianthus. So this is kind of a creeping ground cover style perennial. These will keep foliage through the winter, and they will continue to bloom in through the fall. So these are a great plant to keep color in the fronts of your beds through the winter. That's Dianthus. And let me get myself here. We do have one of my favorites for the perennial garden is Heuchera. Now these can do full shade to part sun. Heuchera is great just to add color to the winter garden. You can get them in purples, greens, yellows, all shades of orange, and these will keep leaves through the winter. So a really great option if you want a low-growing, easy-care perennial. There's probably dozens more color spectrums than these. Great to just add a color palette to your winter garden. And then autumn fern. So ferns, don't overlook ferns. These could also go in the same place, shade to part sun. Autumn ferns in my shade garden actually start putting on these nice orange fronds this time of year. As long as they stay pretty well watered, you're going to get this nice color change in the fall with new growth, and you'll get it again in the spring. One of the more evergreen ferns for us, so great for a little texture in the shade garden. And then last but not least for our perennials, evergreen perennials, Lenten rose. This is kind of the season of the Lenten rose. One of those perennials that's really taken off over the past few years. They're cherished for their evergreen leaves, really thick, tough leaves, and then their blooms. Now these blooms are left over, but typically they're going to bloom in the wintertime, and those blooms will last typically through spring and into summer. So Lenten Rose, a low-growing evergreen perennial that will kind of expand in a clump. Really popular. You're going to get greens, whites, pinks, and even some dark colors with this one. So Lenten Rose, we're definitely well stocked on this right now. All right, I think I've kind of depleted all of our plants in here for foliage. We're going to go on now to blooms for winter. There's a lot less plants in this category, so we'll kind of talk about a few. Camellia, I did a talk on camellia about a week ago. Camellia is a really great one for the winter garden. It's going to bloom typically in the fall, sometimes in the early spring. Evergreen, rose-like blooms. The only thing to consider is where you're going to place the camellia. It needs to be close to a structure. I've got a camellia in here. This is April Dawn, I believe. Let me see if I can find a bloom. Beautiful blooms. This is kind of their natural bloom season right now. Honeybees like them. They tend to smell nice. Camellia, great winter evergreen. Probably one of the most show-stopping winter blooming flowers. We talked about Lenten Rose. I just showed you, and then the Dianthus, the creeper, that is going to bloom. So as well as foliage, those do have blooms. Winter Jasmine. Now this is kind of more of a ground cover, site establishment plant. I don't usually recommend this for front beds of a house, but say you have the sides of a driveway or a wall or road frontage that you just want something for color in the winter. This winter jasmine is going to bloom bright yellow, a lot like forsythia, typically midwinter. So large vining shrub, great cascading over a wall or something like that. Kind of overlooked most of the year because it doesn't do a whole lot in the summer. But in the winter, extremely bright, one of the few things blooming. And that's winter jasmine. Oh, let me see. Witch hazel, which I do not have one of those in here. It looks a lot like the Father Gila. Witch hazel's a really popular native plant that is kind of a big bush, small tree. Those are going to have a really frilly, unique bloom, typically midwinter. So witch hazel, I don't have one to show you here, but witch hazel should be on your list. Hydrangea. So I know what you're thinking. Hydrangea, this is typically a summertime bloom, and it is. When people ask me when to cut them back, it's really when you're done with the blooms and they're not serving their purpose for you. If your hydrangea doesn't have overhead irrigation or it's not too exposed, it might keep those nice blooms through the winter. And I really do believe that the blooms on the panicle hydrangeas, the paniculata, I prefer to leave them up through the winter until we're getting into spring, and then I'll cut them back. You could cut them back right now, but then you might miss some of these crispy, antiqued blooms. I think it's pretty attractive in the winter if that's your thing. Okay, so that's most of the blooming plants that are going to bloom in the winter. I do want to do a special mention for grasses because it's kind of in a middle ground. So grasses in the winter, just like hydrangea, you can cut them back. But if you leave these seed heads on, they will give you some movement, some really neat color to that winter landscape. You can leave these up pretty much. See, make sure we got that in the shot. Pretty much all winter. And this is with all grasses. Pampas grass, fountain grass, miscanthus, maiden grass like this one. Cut them back by mid-spring. But if you leave them up through the winter, you might get an extra extended season of color. In fact, a second thing on this one, some grasses do even go through, we were talking about bronzing. This has a little bit of purple in it. So you're getting some of that bronzing. As well as the seed heads, really great for the winter. And I think Joy talked on some of these seed heads can also be used for wildlife, so double duty. All right, I think that's going to be it for winter blooms. We're going to go on to berries. And like I said, Joy's already talked a lot about these. We'll probably be doubling over what she did. So hollies, number one thing that you're going to see for berries. I don't have an evergreen holly in here, but evergreen hollies are going to produce beautiful berries. Nellie R. Stevens is a popular one. Christmas Jewel. Red Beauty is a nice dwarf that we've been getting a lot more that stays small. So evergreen hollies, as well as deciduous hollies. So this is kind of your typical deciduous holly. This one's winter red. Brilliant red berries. These can be tough to place in a landscape. Typically they'll get between 4 to 8 feet tall. A lot of times these go on the back wood line or on the edge of the property so that you can kind of see this color on the edge. Usually they're a little bit unruly for being close to the house. But the deciduous holly, great for kind of a naturalistic woodline garden. The birds will flock to these. And you're really going to notice them if we do get snow this winter. This is something that will really pop. Chokeberry, chokecherry. I don't have any of those in here, but those would be a good berry crop, a native berry. Beautyberry, I don't have any of those here, but my beautyberry at home is just in full show. As they drop their leaves, you can see those big purple berries. I really do like the American beautyberry. They'll get really big. They will feed wildlife. And one of the most purple colors you're ever going to see in the winter. So that's beautyberry. I don't have any here to show you. And then juniper, which I also don't have in here. Junipers do put on berries in the winter, and there's a lot of wildlife that'll feed from that. They're typically not the showiest. They're typically going to be blue to black. But with some of your blue junipers, you can really see that berry. So berries, great thing to think about in the winter. And then the last thing I do want to talk about for the winter interest in the garden is bark. This is kind of close to my heart because I think this is something that's underutilized in the landscape. Japanese maples are the obvious choice for this. So coral bark. This one's pretty heavy, so I'm not going to pick up. But coral bark, if I can get it close here, you can really see as these leaves drop and as it gets colder, they're going to turn a bright, bright red. In fact, the colder it gets, the redder these tend to get. So coral bark Japanese maple, it tends to be kind of unassuming until we get to the winter, and it is just going to stick out like a sculpture in the winter garden. We have a new variety called Bihou, B-I-H-O-U. It's kind of bred as an alternative to this. It stays a little smaller, and it's going to be more like a bright ginkgo yellow, where the leaves turn yellow, the trunks turn yellow. Really great. Some Japanese maples have green trunks, and all of these will intensify as it gets colder. So when you're out shopping for Japanese maples, after the leaves are done, you've got a lot more to look for. Arakawa, I should mention that one. I don't have one here to show you. Arakawa is a Japanese maple that means literally rough bark. These things get a real knotty, beautiful bark as they get older. Great choice for a garden, one really prized in Japanese collections. So there's quite a few out here for fall color. We can definitely show you any that we have on the lot. River birches, so things that have peeling bark. We're starting to pull out our winter and fall display stuff. I pulled this. We do sell these birch logs. This is what typically your river birch, your paper birch are going to do in this area as they get older. One of those things that really stands out when everything else in the garden goes to bed. Really neat. Birds, animals use this for nesting. I do have a river birch in here. See if I can even pick this guy up. So you can see some fall color still sticking around on this guy. But this is a dwarf Fox Valley river birch. This is a good example of that peeling bark. Normally they need to get a little bit older to have that peeling bark, but since this is a dwarf, it's got a stout trunk. Earlier, you can see this really pretty peeling bark. Every year it gets older, that's going to get better, more fissured. really neat for the natural landscape. Red twig dogwood. So I talked about your dogwood trees, your Cornus Florida, and the red leaves. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the shrub dogwoods. Typically overlooked most of the year, and for good reason. They don't have as showy of blooms. The foliage is just going to be green. But as it gets colder, after the leaves drop in the winter, this is yellow twig dogwood. It's going to be bright, bright yellow. Again, more for like naturalized gardens. Wood line, something to kind of tuck behind to add color. Yellow twigs tend to get bigger. So if you need like a 8 to 12 foot shrub, yellow twig dogwood's a good choice. And I do have the classic red twig. So most people are familiar with red twig dogwood. And here's a little guy here. I believe this is specifically Arctic Fire. Again, once the leaves fall off, the colder it gets, the redder these things are going to get. So really cool for a native landscape. In fact, the tag shows it in snow. So you can see with a winter landscape, these things become way more valuable. You know, places where you get snow, these are used a little more, but I think they definitely belong somewhere in our southern gardens. All right, we're getting towards the end here, y'all. Trying to see if there's any plants that I haven't shown y'all around me. We were talking about grasses. So here's a sedge. Typically, we're going to consider this like an evergreen grass, similar to, say, like monkey grass you might be familiar with. These will keep color. You get the variegation in a lot of these sedges. So for a partially shaded area, sedges can be a great choice just to add color to that bed. Edging, woodland beds, really great choice. There's all sorts of sedges with different color tones in them. So a sedge grass. And then I did forget earlier, Itea. So a great native. This one's Little Henry, so it stays smaller. Great for hedges, for massings of shrubs. These are typically going to go very, very bright red around this time of year. Very consistent fall color, reliable, and tough in the landscape. Cotoneaster. Just kind of pulled this one in there. We still on?
Yes.
Okay. Cotoneaster. This is kind of a low-growing, spreading plant. It is evergreen. However, it does put red berries on through the winter. You do see this sold sometimes in Christmas arrangements as bonsai. But if you need a low ground cover, it really is a shrub, kind of vine-like. Cotoneaster is really neat, really unique. Small leaves, small berries, really petite, kind of interesting plant. And then for those of y'all from the Midwest, this is yucca, typically used as a desert plant. But Color Guard here does get this kind of nice color on the leaves. These will be evergreen. They can take a lot of cold. About the only thing they can't take is excessive water, so a full sun, somewhat dry spot. Yucca, specifically Color Guard, and a few of these yellow varieties are a really good alternative to some of your other interesting winter plants. All right, I think I have touched on just about every plant that I have in this room with me here today. Of course, there's probably some that I've forgotten about. And if you have any questions about those or what you can use, I'd be glad to answer those. Before we go to questions, I do want to mention that this week, at least through Thursday, we do have a 25% off sale on deciduous trees. So this is any shade trees, trees that lose their leaves, excluding Japanese maple. So now is a great time to plant, get your big shade trees in the ground. You may even be able to catch a little fall color while our trees still have leaves on them. So just know we're doing that this week. Great time to come buy some big trees. And I guess we'll open it up to questions.
That's going through the end of November.
Oh, the sale?
Yes.
Okay,
sale.
good. Yeah, so through the end of November. That's good to know. So, yeah, come on out for the next few weeks. 25% off. That's a pretty steep discount. That's almost as good as our employee discount on plants. So, you're really at a good time to plant.
Okay. We were getting questions coming in, but if you could ask them to submit them via text.
Yeah. So if y'all could submit a question via text, we do have everyone muted just to reduce confusion. So if you have any questions, please text it. We'll give a few minutes and I'll answer them as they come.
Okay. Colleen says, is now an okay time to plant witch hazel?
Sure.
Not too cold?
Nope, not at all. And in fact, with the cold, if we're going up into Indiana, we might worry about it. But actually, our soil typically doesn't freeze hard enough to make it a problem for these plants. So witch hazel, great time to plant it. The leaves are falling on the plant, which makes transportation better. But typically, the cold I'm not worried about on these plants. It's more the heat in the summer. So definitely put witch hazel in the ground. Really, any tree or shrub right now, I recommend to put in the ground. All the way through the winter, as long as the ground is not frozen hard, which typically it's not in our area, you're good to plant. Maybe early spring planting I might avoid if you're worried about an early spring warm-up, and then if we get a frost, it could burn the plant. But this time of year, you are good to go.
Also, following up with that question, do you have any in stock?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we should have quite a few witch hazel. Typically, we'll carry them around a 5-gallon size, and those will run anywhere from 3 to 5 foot tall, and they tend to be open. We usually carry a few different varieties with like a yellow bloom or an orange bloom on it.
And those you can also find by searching witch hazel on our website.
Yep. Witch hazel. The species is Hamamelis if you want to get Latin. So Hamamelis is the species. That's the same as witch hazel. We should have a good number in stock right now.
What variety is the crossvine that you showed?
That is probably Tangerine Beauty. We'll pick it up again. So Tangerine Beauty, I have 3 on the side of my house. This is the variety I have. I typically get blooms from mid-spring, and they are just stopping blooming. So, wonderful plant. Tangerine Beauty is probably the most common one we sell. There's a few other varieties. Big difference is going to be bloom color. Otherwise, you'll still get this nice bronzing and evergreen vine.
What are the light requirements for crossvine?
Crossvine, so full sun. At my house, it is in full all-day sun. No break. It does just fine. If you're walking around the woodlands here, you can see them growing up trees in full shade. So very diverse. If you put it in sun, just expect to water it for a little while. And in shade, it may not be as full and lush as it is in the sun. So crossvine, really versatile. Full shade to full sun. Just expect the plant to be fuller in the sun.